Welcome to the Norris Group Real Estate Podcast, a show committed to bringing you insights from thought leaders shaping the real estate industry. In each episode, we'll dive into conversations with industry experts and local insiders, all aimed at helping you thrive in an ever-changing real estate market, continuing the legacy that Bruce Norris created, sharing valuable knowledge, and empowering you on your real estate journey. Whether you're a seasoned pro or a newcomer, this is your go-to source for insider tips, market trends, and success strategies. Here's your host, Craig Evans.
Welcome, everybody, to the Norris Group Real Estate Podcast. Today, we have a couple of special guests. First of all, we have a special guest host, Bruce Norris. You guys might have heard of that guy. And Sean OToole. Sean OToole is CEO and founder of PropertyRadar, the property data and owner information platform real estate pros have trusted since 2007 to do billions of dollars in deals. Sean got to start with data in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom. After the dot-com bubble, Sean flipped properties for 5 years and with data-informed insights got out right before the housing bubble burst. Sean launched ForeclosureRadar in early 2007 before anyone had heard of the foreclosure crisis. In 2013, he relaunched ForeclosureRadar as PropertyRadar, a greatly expanded property data and owner information platform serving a broad audience of real estate professionals and property-centric businesses. Today, PropertyRadar remains the go-to platform for data-driven real estate professionals intent on leveraging comprehensive property data and owner information to grow their businesses directly. Let's welcome Sean OToole and that other guy, Bruce Norris.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Today we have a very special guest, Sean OToole. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing awesome.
We go way back.
We do.
Just a very brief introduction. You started ForeclosureRadar, which morphed into PropertyRadar. You and I had the idea to go to the Library of Congress and look at data for 2 or 3 days, and that was just a lot of fun. We got to know each other pretty well, and always respected you. And my son Aaron got to work for your company at the end of his life, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely loved it having Aaron here for sure.
You and I spent some time every year when we went to the library of, not the Library of Congress, but Nixon Library. And we had some interesting conversations. And one of the things you mentioned, and I'm going to kind of go down that rabbit hole for a second. Something important happened on your 10th birthday. Your dad had specifically said there was something special about what he wanted to get you for that 10th birthday. What was the birthday gift, and how did that impact your life?
Yeah, it was, I was 10 years old. It was an Apple II computer. Actually, didn't get it for my birthday, but, it was my 10th year. So
okay.
I was 10 years old, and they bought it ostensibly for their business, my parents' business. But my mom's office was in my bedroom. I had kind of a big bedroom. So when I was at school, she would go in there and do the books and stuff. And that was a mistake, putting that computer in a 10-year-old's bedroom. Started my my history of late nights and staying up till 2, 3 a.m. and impacted my school a little, but I still did okay.
How did that impact your life, that computer?
Oh, that computer just, changed everything for me. I learned to program, understand there wasn't much to do on a computer. Like younger people probably won't understand that today. But, that early Apple II computer, there was, very little to do on it, right? There's only a couple of programs. There was a couple of really terrible games. And, so there just wasn't much to do. And so you took up programming. And I remember I was probably 12. My dad came home and I had the lid off and I was soldering inside this, and I think it was, even back then, it was probably $4,000. So you think about that in 1978.
Yeah.
Was a lot of money. My dad freaked out, but it made the computer a lot better and faster, and he kind of let me do whatever I want after that.
How did you figure that out?
Byte magazine was kind of my Bible as a kid. And I remember the first time I read Byte magazine, I understood maybe 5 words. And but I read that magazine. It was thick. It was like this thick, like a 3/4 inch thick magazine. It's just huge back in the day. And I would read it cover to cover, even though I didn't understand anything. And over time, I understood more and more. And, by 12, I had the thing apart, was soldering. It was a speed upgrade.
And I'm thinking about what $4,000 meant back then, because I think a house in California cost about 40 grand, like 10% of the house. No wonder your dad was going, what the heck?
Yeah, he wasn't happy.
When your son turned 10, did you go through that same process and say, I think I'm going to get him something that might be meaningful?
Yeah, so that was as he was approaching 10, it was like, the question I had for myself is, what can I do for my son that gave me the same opportunities that my parents buying that computer when I was 10 gave me, right? Because it unlocks so many opportunities. I've been at great startups in Silicon Valley, and just, through my whole life, it's just gave me nothing but opportunity. And I, of course, want that for my son. And, but I knew it wasn't a computer, right? Computers are now table stakes. Everybody has them. Everybody knows how to use them, and the rest. And as you know, I'm a student of economics, like you are, and paid a lot of attention to that, and kind of pay a lot of attention to kind of what's happening in the world right now, and basically came to the conclusion that at some point manufacturing is going to have to come back to the U.S. and it's going to have to stop using, child labor in China. And that there was going to be a lot of opportunity around, manufacturing and just-in-time manufacturing and 3D printing and things along those lines. So I built a shop. I bought CNC equipment, and we got 3D printers and electronics benches and all of that kind of stuff, and just said, let's build stuff. Let's invent stuff. Let's make stuff.
That was one of the aha moments in the limo. You had mentioned a 3D printer. I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember going home and reading about they had a kid that was like under a year old that had a heart defect. They were able to print his heart and see what the defect was so they could operate directly to where it was necessary. And that was the first time I had ever heard of that.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, what? So, yeah, it's always been fun in those limo rides with you, because I always hear something out of this world, out of my normal world anyway. So, yeah, that's been a pretty cool experience. What got you into real estate in the beginning of, you went from doing, I think, startups and all the computer stuff. How did real estate enter the picture?
It kind of happened twice. I dropped out of college to start my first software company when I was 18. It actually did really well until my partners stole from me. And but at that point, at 18, I bought a house, I drove a Porsche, I had a boat. Like computer really did well for me, right? Like really well. And so then I was like, okay, what am I going to do next after this startup? It really didn't fail. It just got broken by my partners.
Right.
And at the time, my dad wanted to retire, but he was 2 years away from early retirement. He wanted to go to Hawaii, move to Hawaii, and he found a real estate magazine for sale there. So I went over and ran that for 2 years. I'll keep that story real short, but it is what made me a student of economics, because we bought it right before the Japan crisis, debt crisis, and real estate in Hawaii tanked, and it was a terrible 2 years to be trying to sell ads to realtors. And I actually vowed I'd never sell anything to realtors again, yet here I am. And then kind of similarly, after the tech crash, I'd been doing startups in Silicon Valley, and I took a year off and made a friend with a guy who had all this free time, which I'd never had in Silicon Valley. And, we were learning to kite surf and snowboard, and well, I already knew how to snowboard, but you get the idea. We're going and playing, and except he was making a few $1,000,000 a year, and I was just burning through savings. Like, how do you have this time? And he was in commercial real estate, and long story short, he said, "Don't go back to Silicon Valley," because I needed to go back to work, and instead he introduced me to a buddy who was flipping foreclosures. Said I should go write some software for him. I wasn't super interested in writing software for 40 Thieves. But when I looked at his returns, I said, okay, this is probably something worth doing with the money I made from Silicon Valley. If I put that to work, like, this will be a better life, a better outcome than just going back to Silicon Valley. Unless you get that perfect brass ring and you're a founder, early stage person at a Google or something big.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, because that not everybody starts at buying a trustee sales. That's for sure.
It is the most complicated, form of investing I think there is, and it's the highest risk as well.
Have you ever seen somebody buy something that was like, oh, that you shouldn't have done that?
Sure. Yeah, I have seen multiple of those. My favorite one was a guy bought a second for $150,000 is the check he had to hand over. And he didn't realize it was a second. He thought it was a first. He thought he was buying a house, right? He thought the auction sold houses, not that they sold loan positions. And the first money, or the first on the thing, was a hard money loan. And the hard money lender was there at the auction and went up and explained to the guy that, okay, you now owe me $450,000 on a $350,000 house.
Wow.
That he just put $150,000 into. So $600,000 into a $350,000 house. The guy ran, grabbed the check out of the auctioneer's hand, and took off running down the street.
Really?
Yeah. And, I think that's technically at that point felony bank robbery.
I think so.
Yeah, because it's now the bank's money, and it was a big bank that had the second. So, so he had just committed felony bank robbery by running off with that check. I never really heard what happened. I don't think he went to jail, but
no.
But yeah,
he probably kept his 150, but never came back to the auction. That's for sure.
He definitely never saw him again.
No, I had something happen like that. Only I warned the guy before he did it. I came up to him. Yeah, I said, "You realize that's a second?" He said, "No." I said, "That's a second." So after that, he became an investor of mine. He says, "I'm just putting my money with you." So anyway, how did you decide to share the information? Because you certainly would have an advantage of finding information on trustee sales. When did you decide to make that part of what you did?
Yeah, well, at the end of 2005, I said I don't want to own any more real estate, and I sold everything. But I was already tracking all these foreclosures, and and I had people that worked for me that were doing that, and I didn't really want to fire them or make them go out and look for another job. And so I actually talked to like foreclosure.com and Realty Track and others about potentially selling them this auction tracking data, because none of them had it. None of them still do. And, actually almost got into contract with one of them. And they said, "Oh, you're just scraping this data. That's easy to get. We'll get it ourselves." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you have no idea how hard it is to get this data." We had a database of over 150 trustees even then. And at about the same time, a friend of mine from Silicon Valley, who's famous for starting a company that's recognizable as a household name, kind of kicked me in the butt, said, "Hey, you've been helping other people do startup companies. It's time for you to do one." And I'd given him access to the software I built for myself for foreclosures, because he had some money from his exit on his company, and he was buying a property down in the Marin area, east of San Francisco. And he's like, "This is really good. You ought to make this available." So that was the turning point for me.
What year was that?
That was, probably May of 2006 that I made the decision.
And you were about to count a lot of foreclosures.
I didn't quite realize what was, I knew I didn't want to own any more real estate, but I didn't fully realize how bad it would get,
Yeah, it was a bad 3-year stretch.
Yeah. And normally what we see in kind of being a student of economics like yourself, right? Normally what we see is the government step in pretty quickly with bailouts. So you get this kind of boom bust cycle. And I thought that would come faster and harder than it did. Ultimately, in 2010, I was one of the first to say this crisis is over. They've made the regulatory changes that are necessary. Our foreclosure business actually, peaked in 2013 before it started to dramatically tail off and people really realized it was over. Kind of all that was late entrance. But yeah, 2010, it was pretty clear to me that it was done.
When did ForeclosureRadar morph into PropertyRadar?
As quickly as I could after I made that decision in 2010, but we launched it early 2013. So it took about 2 years.
Okay. And PropertyRadar, who's the typical client? Well, first of all, if I go on YouTube, I see foreclosures have exploded and they're going to be closing in on 2008 levels. And I guess I'll ask you, how ridiculous is that statement?
I like to remember that going from one foreclosure to 2 foreclosures is 100%.
That's right. Yeah, they use percentages all the time.
Yeah. So, are there more foreclosures? Sure. Are they increasing? Are they likely to increase more? Yeah, probably. But we're still overall, like the equity and the rest, even if we had a decent correction in prices, it's not going to be anything like, 2008. I mean, just the chances of getting back there are super low. We just don't have, especially like the qualifying people on the option payment of a pay option arm. Like the pay option arm's a great product. You just can't qualify people based on the option payment. You have to qualify them on the 30-year payment. And if you do that, it's a great product. It gives people, it actually lowers the chance of distress. But the way they used it, it allowed people to pay way more for properties than they should have. And, I think property right now in the U.S. is significantly overvalued. And so it's just, how does that unwind? Does that unwind just with time and, income, inflation and inflation basically over time? Or does it bust somehow? Right now, I still feel like it's more likely just an unwind over a long period of time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I had to kind of do the math on that one 3 years ago in a report. That was the idea. It's either 1% mortgage rates or we lost a decade.
Yeah.
So,
I think we lost a decade.
Yeah, we're going to lose a decade because you have so many people with great mortgages in place. So first of all, that stuff's not for sale. Where the dilemma is that you have realtors making 45% less commissions because that group of properties isn't coming for sale. And so you have a smaller group of properties for sale and a smaller group of people that didn't get in, that want in, and that can afford it. So
and that has economic impacts too, right?
Absolutely.
Less commission for realtors, less work for title companies, less work for lenders. Like all of that is
45%
for the economy.
45% is Great Depression level stuff for that part of the industry. So we were invited to an hour-and-a-half lunch at Fannie Mae with the president. That was the discussion. That's if you want to solve that, let these loans that are in place move forward to a new buyer. Find out to get that to be a transaction.
Yeah, you and I have been talking about that for years, and the assumable mortgage, like it's a big reason why the 1970s into the 1980s was a very different outcome than 2008.
When you
pay more for a property where you could keep the mortgage at 7% rather than having to get a new mortgage at 15%.
Absolutely.
So it actually pushed prices up.
For probably over 10 years, you and I drove in a limo. We were in the back and we'd have discussions. And there's always some interesting conversations. And one such trip, you said the biggest problem our country will have in the future is how to have a peaceful society when 50% of the people don't have jobs. And that was like, what? And in trying to get my arms wrapped around artificial intelligence and the progression that it can make, all of a sudden I start thinking, wow, is that a remote possibility somewhere in the next 5 years? What do you think of that?
Yeah. So, right now, I think we're still in the phase, for the most part, where AI is creating more opportunities than it's eliminating. But ultimately, I think people look at this the wrong way.
Okay.
Like, our goal as a society should be to have greater productivity with less work, right? So that been thinking a lot. We use a lot right now. We talk about how we need to beat this country or win or whatever. And, and the same thing with AI. There's a lot of people like, oh, we can't let AI happen. We can't let it take our jobs. We can't, it's like this confrontational kind of mindset, right? But there is a potential future where we leverage AI and robotics to upgrade all of humanity to where we as people don't have to do those terrible jobs, that slave labor, that whatever, right? And the better at that we get, the fewer people will need to work, because more of that work will be done by AI and robots. And that's a great utopian vision of the future if you have it. Musk is pitching that now. I think most of us in tech have kind of had that in our head, for some time, is that's where we're headed. I mean, I think those of us that are honest in tech also have no illusions that the software we create takes away jobs. When I launched ForeclosureRadar, one of the first calls I got was from a gentleman in Concord, California. And he said, Sean, he's like, this is just unbelievable. He's like, I used to have 3 full-time people that I no longer need to have. I can just use your software, because he was tracking the sales in quite a few counties himself. And he had to have all these people calling all these trustees and doing it. And then for $49 a month, I replaced 3 people.
Right.
And that's an awesome story for him, but it's kind of a terrible story for those 3 people, right? And that's really, and the downside of that, what that does is that concentrates wealth in the technology. So we have all these billionaires, right, that run these tech companies. And at the end of the day, these tech companies, what they're doing is they're destroying jobs, but they're creating tremendous wealth because they're doing that same job for a lot less money.
Correct.
That's the bad side of it.
Right.
The good side of it is if we do this right, we don't need to spend as much time working and the rest, and we can bring up everybody's quality of life. And we need to start thinking about it that way and looking at it that way, and how do we transition to that? And that was the conversation we had in the car. Like, how do we think about a future where we don't need everybody to work, but we don't just go totally wealth gap, haves and have-nots?
Right, because that's not a peaceful society generally.
No, it won't end well for the haves.
No.
Because, you get Cuba. We see this throughout history where you get too big of a disparity and folks rise up.
So I really haven't paid attention to this topic until the last 3 days. And so I'm an amateur asking questions to a pro. But one thing, it did scare me, when I started watching the interviews, because it seems like there's a lot at stake. Whether you're a company or a country, you wouldn't mind winning this and being the decider of how the outcome plays out.
The problem with winning is that I kind of hate that. I like winning, but I like winning in games where there isn't a loser. And you think about it at a geopolitical level, like we need to beat China, like we need to win, they need to lose. All you're doing there is saying we're going to have conflict.
We're going to have conflict? Yes.
We're going to have conflict because they won't just lose, right? They'll kill all billion people before they lose, right? Trying to kill us.
Okay, so I think that's the path. I think I see these interviews where you do have people that have a different opinion of, like, I want to be first, and then you have a group of these people that are collectively in the business, and they're all geniuses going, how do we make this the best outcome possible?
And that's where I like lead a lot better than win.
Yeah.
Right. So it's important to lead. And I think that on that front, right, we need to think about, especially as a country, how do we lead, help those other companies come up too? Because if they don't, they're going to be in conflict with us. But how do we stay the leader? And I think that's the right conversation. So didn't mean to go on a little tangent on the word win, but
no, that's
something I'm thinking about a lot right now.
No, I think that has to be part of the discussion. When I was looking at all this information and I was listening to all these interviews, I found it interesting because there was definitely some unease about the outcome going in a direction that no one wanted, but not sure that if you were like an egomaniac and you got there first, that you wouldn't be happy to be able to call the shots. And
right.
That's the scary part, because there is a point, and I'm talking beyond, I'll ask you, how close are we to a point where somebody gets the ultimate power, whatever that is, and they get there first? Is that dangerous for the person or the company that was in second? That type of thing.
Yeah. So I think, so if we come back to the internet really quickly, right? Okay. And the World Wide Web and the 1990s, right? There were winners and there were losers. Netflix won, right? Blockbuster lost.
Right.
But I think Netflix won by leading and Blockbuster lost by not keeping up with the times.
Right. Not seeing what was next. That's right.
Blockbuster didn't lose because, Netflix was out to kill them.
Right.
Right. So there's some intent there that I think is important. But there will definitely be winners and losers. I think if you're not really focused on how this changes your company and what you can create using these new tools that are available to us, like, you probably deserve to have your company, slowly fade away, right? And just like Blockbuster did, it didn't happen overnight. It took a little while. There's going to be people who still like going to the store and grabbing the tape, but over time, right, I think those things will fade away. And I think that's just a choice for the people who run those companies where they want to be. And there's no question it's a serious time of change, and that's going to create a lot of opportunities. There will be Netflixes that replace Blockbusters 100%. There will be companies that we haven't heard of yet that will be super important tomorrow, and there will be companies we think couldn't possibly go anywhere that won't continue to exist over the next 10 years. Then there's there's that piece, right? Then there's this bigger piece where you got people saying, okay, we're going to get to general intelligence, and the general intelligences are going to want to wipe out humans on Earth, right? Like that kind of, there's that whole narrative going around, and that what we're creating is super dangerous on that side. I'm skeptical there. I think we're a long way away from that. So, the head, I'm going to forget his name right now, of Meta's chief scientist just left because he doesn't think LLMs will ever get there. He wants to work on world models. That's a whole other conversation. I think he's probably right that LLMs won't get there, large language models. So that's not something I'm particularly worried about at this point. Then there's a third issue, which is, kind of the bad actor scenario. So does it become easier with large language models and this amount of compute, regardless whether it's for a large language model or whatever, but just the power of the chips and how they continue to grow, it's going to make things that weren't previously possible, not only possible, or things that were previously possible, but too hard, but anybody, but, really large governments to do. It's going to make those easier for bad actors to do.
Okay.
And I don't think there's any question about that, right? Like, it's going to get easier to develop, a COVID-19 that's more lethal and release it. Those kinds of things I do think get easier. And this comes back to the lead side of things, right? Like, we need a government that understands these threats, is actively out looking, understands that these can happen, and is working to make sure we have great responses in place, great detection in place, all of that kind of thing. And I think we're woefully behind on that, as humanity, not just as the U.S.
Okay.
Like, we need to make sure on the lead side, right? We need to be investing billions, maybe $1 trillion, right, as a country into making sure we're at the forefront of all this so that whatever anybody else does down here, we've got something to counter with. And I don't mean beat them. I don't mean beating a bad actor for sure, but not beating like other countries, but like just making sure that, hey, we're going to show the world how we can do this, how we can get to a point where people don't need to work as much. They can have a higher quality of life and they don't have to worry about bad actors. And I think all those things are possible with the right leadership.
Well, that's going to do it for part 1 of our interview with Sean OToole, CEO and founder of PropertyRadar. Be sure to tune in next week for part 2.
For more information on hard money loans, trust deed investing, and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For more information on passive investing through the DBL Capital Real Estate Investment Fund, please visit dblcapital.com.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under the California DRE license 01219911, Florida Mortgage Lender license 1577, and NMLS license 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the hard money tab.